On today's episode, we will be talking with two knowledgeable women from the Parent Education and Advocacy Leadership Center, also known as the PEAL Center. Mary Hartley, Executive Director, and Cindy Duch, the Director of Individual Assistance, have such amazing insight on how valuable parent collaboration truly is when working with schools. Today's episode will not disappoint as we discuss variability and how it empowers extraordinary.
Welcome to Very Able, the story of variability, the podcast where we explore the wonderful world of education and delve into the power of honoring learning variability and understanding that all kids are very able. Your hosts, Brianne and Andrea, two educational consultants with IU8, will navigate the ever-changing landscape of instructional practices and share strategies, insights, and inspiring stories that will empower you to create truly inclusive learning environments in order to unlock the full potential of every student and to create transformative educational experiences for all. Come along as we explore variability to empower extraordinary. Welcome back to another episode of Very Able, the podcast where we explore the wonderful world of education and delve into the power of honoring learner variability. Andrea, what do we have on our agenda today?
Hey, Brianne. Today we have some very special guests, our first interview. So today we have Mary Hartley and Cindy Duch from the PEAL Center. So thanks so much for being here, Mary and Cindy. So before we dive in, can you, Mary and Cindy, introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about where you come from and what we're going to talk about today?
Sure. My name is Mary Hartley. I'm not only the executive director of the PEAL Center, but I'm also the parent of a person who used special education services in school. He's now 23 years old. I come to this work as a parent advocate, really learning from the ground up with the local task force on the right to education, getting involved in my local school district, and then growing my skills as an advocate from there. Becoming a professional. And today, we're going to be talking about the PEAL Center, which is the Parent Education and Advocacy Leadership Center. We are the statewide Parent Training and Information Center, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm here with my colleague, Cindy Duch, who's the Director of Individual Assistance at the PEAL Center. Cindy?
Thanks, Mary. And I think a lot of us that are in this work come to it as parents. I too am a parent of an individual who went through the special education system. And that gives us a little more insight to what other families are going through. He was fully included preschool through, post 12th grade. And that's probably what we're here to do, is to kind of guide families, empower them with experience, from lived experience.
Awesome. What a great lens to bring. And I like how you talked about inclusion, because that's really where the heart of this podcast is coming from. We are aiming to ensure that everybody is meaningfully included in their general education curriculum and with their general education peers. So we appreciate that lens that you all are bringing to us today. So you talked about the PEAL Center, PEAL, right?
Yep.
So can you explain a little bit about what is PEAL and what is the Parent Training Information Network?
Sure. So under IDEA, there's actually a portion of it that is about funding parent training information centers. And we're all across the nation. PEAL happens to is one of the few that really runs a large state. And we have offices in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and we have staff across Pennsylvania. A really diverse, interesting group of people who all have lived experience, whether as people with disabilities or as parents or family members. And what we do is training, information, and individual assistance. And you'll hear a little bit more about all those today. We also have a lot of robust resources, things that are videotaped copied, in the queue on our website that are accessible to anybody, any time of the day. But I think at the core of our mission is really providing families with understanding their rights and the resources they need to successfully advocate to support their child, and then ultimately to teach children to become young adult when they become young adults, and then as they're young adults to learn to advocate for themselves. And that's also teaching and sort of organizing around making sure parents learn those skills of letting go and developing those skills with their kids. So it's really it's fundamentally, we're about inclusion. There's no question about it. It is the focus of our work, has been since 2005 when we opened, and continues to this day. We're very focused on making sure that kids are included from the start.
That's great. I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about how a parent advocacy center can help the parents and caregivers better understand the concept of learner variability, which is a lot of what we focus on here on our podcast, and then its impact on their child's education?
Sure. I'm going to let Cindy take that.
I think, for parents to remember that the I in IEP is for individualized, and that, that's what we focus on. That's what families bring to the IEP team, is that vision for their child. I have a mentor that often says, as parents, we don't have a retirement plan. So, anything that we're bringing to the team is what's going to support our child lifelong. And in that vein, we can share information and resources to families to, better understand what they are entitled to, what their children are entitled to through the law. We use that as our foundation and our basis to ensure that, that they're heard at their IEP meetings, and that it is truly individualized, that anything that they feel their child needs, they need to talk about at that IEP meeting and ensure that their individual needs are being met.
And thinking about that too, sort of, how are you presenting the IEP in order to make sure you get what you need to make that unique experience work? I think part of what happens, and I have the good fortune of hearing Cindy and her team work with families, that the potential is there to make those changes, and sort of how do we come to the table as parents? We always talk about bringing coffee and donuts. It is the operational idea that we are a team and we work together. And so I think in coming to that process and how you get what you need, what are the specifics, your knowledge base has to grow. You have to get a lot of information in order to really be able to understand those specifics. And I do think people get caught up on one thing, a lot of times, or two things in the IEP, and they might need some help to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you explain a little bit about some of the resources that you might utilize as you work with parents in advocating at IEP team meetings?
Well, we don't necessarily advocate at meetings. The role of the PEAL Center and of any PTI is to empower families to be their child's advocate. We can bring, advocates or others who know the child or know about what the law says to our meetings, but we bring continuity to those meetings. So we are there to let the family know how they can best present what they feel is important for their child, and bring that information to the team in a way that works. Mary mentions the donuts and the coffee, and that's the whole idea of bringing that team aspect to the table, being collaborative. And that's what we often say, it's okay to be assertive. We're not going to be aggressive, because that doesn't work. So when they know their rights and can assert those rights, they're going to be effective, equal partners on that team, which is, their entitlement and what we look forward to share with them. The resources that we get, PEAL has a lot of our own resources that we've developed. We rely heavily on patent and the information they have. It's probably best when, teachers and families are learning together the same information. So a lot of the patent information, for listeners, that's patent, PATTAN.net. We share that information with families so that they can bring those to their meetings, and the other team members can see, oh, this is something that's really reliable, comes from a reliable source and really useful. And the PTI network, nationwide has a lot of resources, from parentcenterhub.org. There's a whole library of resources to be used by families and by professionals.
Great. And you mentioned a lot of websites there, and we'll make sure that everybody can have access to that in our show notes. But absolutely, I think that education, right, and knowing that parents bring so much knowledge about their students and about their children to an IEP team is very important. So I like how you said that, you are not the advocates, right? But our parents are advocating for themselves and for their child.
If I could just add to that, just one thought, and this is a we have some exceptions for that. We will attend an IEP meeting under certain situations. One, the person doesn't speak English. We can provide interpretation, or one of our staff who is bilingual. I think that's essential because there is so much communication breakdown, especially for people who are just learning the language. It's just incredibly complex. Let's face it, you really literally have to have a master's degree in this to understand it. As a parent, even, we train people to get to this level. It doesn't happen overnight. It is not understandable. I'm sorry. It tries to be, but it's not. And then the other situation would be if a person has a disability themselves, or, significant issues communicating. We might talk with them in advance and work with them at the meeting itself.
I think that's so important to follow up with what you said. Like, it's the knowledge that you have to have and how advanced the languages and understanding. So it's really great that you're supporting parents, because it is brand new to them. We went to school for things like this, but they more than likely did not. So following up from that, they know their student best, and we talked about learner variability, but bringing that awareness, how can parents bring that awareness, whether it's at the IEP meeting or just with communicating with the educators, therapists, administrators? Like, how do you support them in sharing that information about their children?
So I'll have Cindy take most of this, but just to suggest initially, if they need individual assistance, if they really do need help learning how to navigate the IEP challenges, we'll talk about training later, but this individual assistance piece is really important. I don't think a lot of people think of it as individual assistance. So actually, when you go to our website, which is pealcenter.org, at the very top, it says need to talk. You click on that. You can call us TTY. You can do 1-800 numbers, but you can also fill out a form online. And then that gets forwarded to someone who works specifically in your county, so that you're getting information. They're more familiar with those districts. They have a sense of what's going on, and they can support you. And then they go to an individual, a staff member called a family resource specialist, and Cindy can talk about what they do.
So the individual assistance that we provide, and it's talking with a real person, one-on-one, and getting information, that's relevant to the individual needs of the student, and keeping that in mind. Now, for a family to share information with their team, at the PEAL Center, we've used another PTI's model of a student snapshot. And that's the idea of, using a form to think about what are the individual interests of the student, and how will that information then translate to what the educators, what the teachers and people that work with the student can bring that will keep the child engaged, keep them interested, and work to motivate them. Some parents come up with, a binder where they're sharing information with their team every year. And it's important to know those little things, what TV shows they like and what they do for fun, just to motivate kids and to know the child better. So, through that one-on-one assistance, we can help them understand things like that, what they can bring to the team, and ensure that, individual needs are met. Sometimes families struggle with, the disability itself. What does that mean? What does it mean for my child and how they learn? We look to, we look to IDA to support families if they need information about the disability or about how a child learns. We look to the school to share that information with families. And that way, the parent can be an equal partner and be fully informed, which again is an entitlement to families. Be that equal partner on that team.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, I love that snapshot. As educators, we're with the child like 7.5 hours a day, and we feel like we really get to know them, but we don't know what they're like outside of those walls. And sometimes sitting in those meetings, the parents are like, are we talking about the same kid? And I think that's great where, they bring their perspective and the teachers can bring their perspective, and all together just really creating that whole child profile. I love that.
I just to add to that, I think one of the things that we do more and more of as advocates is encourage the child themselves at any age to be part of the IEP team, especially early on, just to have that first experience to say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, or let me tell you about why I stim, or whatever it is, right? That it gives the team a sense of that person, and sort of working with your child at home to sort of build capacity as a parent. That's our role, is to really teach them to be able to say no, to know how to express themselves when they need to in whatever format they use, whether it's AAC, or augmentative communication, or if they're speaking it, or if they've written it up. We actually have some great examples that we've done in a few conferences and meetings, sharing different ways that students can participate. One of my favorites is one of our colleagues' daughters does amazing videos every time she goes in. And it shows her doing the things she does outside of school, which are just dramatic, And I talked to somebody recently about this, that their child ended up learning French, and they have Down syndrome, and they had some difficulty reading, but they learned to speak French. And the school was sort of like, they can't be in French, they can't read. And she said, but he learned to speak English. Why wouldn't he learn to speak French? He likes French, right? And he speaks French, right? Why do we limit kids based on our perceptions of what they can and can't learn, rather than giving them the opportunities to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a couple different key elements of the push towards inclusion. And number one is presuming competence and understanding that, it doesn't matter who we're working with. If we don't have the lens of ability and very able, we're not going to get anywhere. And that's with students that are diagnosed and receiving special education services. And that's with students that aren't. Because we think about other factors like socioeconomic status, we think about language barriers, right? So a lot of good information can be found under that guise of presuming competence and making the least dangerous assumption about our students. And I think the next thing that kind of I'm hearing a lot about too is understanding what kind of engages students and motivates students, and really empowering. And I love that word, empower. I think it gets thrown out a lot, but giving our students the chance and the ability and the awareness all together that they can say, this is what I like. This is how I like to receive information, right? That kind of UDL framework of multiple means of representation. And this is how I like to show you what I know. Maybe I want to say it in French, right? That ability to give multiple ways to explain and act and express. So I think that we, that's a whole, this is all comes back to those kind of two foundations. And I think being able to work with your parents and your teachers and your students to be able to understand that is very, very powerful.
I think we'd like to clone both of you. Seriously, you just said everything we say.
Yeah.
And I love that. UDL is great for everyone. It's great for me. If I have a universal design for learning and that's an expectation in a meeting that I go to, I can share in the ways and understand in the ways that I learn best and can present best. And it's just fair. It's equitable for anyone. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Would either of you be able to maybe share a success story or something that's personal to you that kind of continues to drive, that great work that you're doing with parents and families?
Well, I think of a family that we were talking to recently, and the district, they present their recommendations that the child be educated in more direct instruction and a more small group setting. But the parent, again, bringing what they know about their own child, felt that, in what they've seen in the neighborhood with the kids all playing together and how their child with a disability really learned from their peers, wanted to bring that to the IEP team. And as there is, I usually say parents are calling us not because things are working well, but because there's some things going on where they need help. And he wanted to bring to the team, this was a dad calling, he wanted to bring to the team how inclusive education was better for this child as an individual. So we brainstormed, we talked a lot about, the positives, the benefits, the research that shows that inclusive education works for kids. And we did introduce him to the framework for access and belonging that Patton has recently developed and put out there to ensure that kids are getting the supports that they need to be in the general education classroom. A lot of times families are thinking, that they have to be on grade level, or they have to be, learning and providing the same work that other students in the classroom are. So we kind of have to go through that and explain to parents that it's all about that individualization and how the IEP team supports them to be able to do that.
Awesome. And maybe before you share, Mary, you brought up, Cindy, the FAB framework, right? Or the framework for access and belonging. So that is absolutely something that is available for teachers, administration, and parents to request and really take a look at, what does this student need in order to be included, right? And it can be, if it's a transition, a hinge, going from grade to grade, or moving buildings or moving districts. It's a really great tool that really helps us look at the strengths and needs of a student, and not just the needs, right? Not just they aren't doing this and they aren't doing that, but really embracing, that social piece of that kiddo, right? Which is super important in the educational setting. So absolutely. And we can put a show note with a link to that FAB framework. They have a website with a lot of great resources on there as well. We actually at the IU have 2 folks that are trained in the FAB. I'm one of them, and then our transition facilitator is also and Brianne too. Yes,
I got trained too.
how about it? So look at that, maybe 3. How about it? So we have some folks that can help as well with that FAB framework.
That's great.
And before we move on, Cindy, I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to kids who are having behavioral issues. Specifically, and I'll give an example, and this is sort of silly, but when I was advocating for my son many moons ago, I asked for behavioral assessments to be done. And the teacher said, well, he's not a bad kid. He just stims. Like understanding what behavior is. Behavior is not, it doesn't have to mean a negative. I think behavior is kind of a bad word really for it. But, we were talking about sort of occupational therapy needs more than that, or, his sensory integration supports and how we could build capacity for him to stay in the classroom longer and be successful at receiving information. And so if you could talk a little bit about that process, Cindy, I think it's super helpful. I know you have, to be quite frank, we get a lot of calls about behavior. It's probably one of the biggest reasons why kids are pushed out of typical education in multiple ways. So Cindy, if you could share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that is in the top, if not the top issue that families are calling about is regarding behavior. And like Mary said, we're not always talking about kids who are disrupting the classroom, getting up and walking around, or, when we think of more extreme cases where kids are throwing things, behavior is anything that impedes the child's learning or the learning of others. So for some kids, that's just being off task. So, having families understand when we say behavior, what that means and how that can be addressed through the IEP, we want to share that information with them so that we can ensure that, number one, they're getting the supports they need, and that number 2, they're not being disciplined for things that either are a manifestation of their disability or that should be supported. With the OSEP guide and Office of Special Education Programs guidance on discipline and behavior that was released in 2022, at that level, they noticed exclusionary practices going on where kids are taken from the classroom or from the school, and that disrupts their education. And we want to think of ways to ensure that they are provided the support that they need regarding behavior, and that that's happening in the classroom, and that they are there to get the education that they're entitled to, and not experiencing those exclusionary practices that take them away from peers, take them away from learning. So we often refer to that guidance and have families share it with the school. There's a question and answer part of that guidance that's really helpful for families. That's really distressing because I know I experienced it, to get a call from the school about your child's behavior. But, a lot of times that's coming from a place of the child not having language skills to communicate what's going on with them. So that finding out what is going on, what's the function of that behavior, so important. And I think we just have to keep those things in mind. And I'd really like to plug Shelley Moore and her videos for behavior and coming to those aha moments of, oh, that's why you did that. So that's what we're looking for, that aha.
We love Shelley Moore here.
We do.
How can you not?
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a couple of the things that you said there, Cindy, if I heard you, was that we need to think about the why behind what we're seeing. And we also need to think about the supports that we provide in order to ensure that our students are getting maybe some of those sensory needs met in the classroom, or getting some of those language needs met as well too, because we see a lot of that. And I think Brian can also attest that we get a lot of talk about, and when we talked, we threw the B word out, behavior, and you can't see it on the audio, right? But we throw those quotes up, those air quotes, because sometimes behavior does get a bad rap, but behavior really comes down to anything that we're doing, right? We all have behavior, whether or not it's expected or unexpected, or what have you. So I really appreciate that statement there, and that information, Cindy.
Let me just add two thoughts to that, and that is that always look for the antecedent. What happened right before that moment, and keep data. That's one of the best ways to kind of figure out, oh, this keeps happening when those lights are flickering or whatever. It's really important. I don't think a lot of people, they get frustrated, and understandably, you have a class full of kids and you're dealing with a lot of different issues. My son stimmed and hummed and jumped. And it really, when he was fully included, it was when teachers were sort of taught how to treat it like a metronome, that he could go to the back of the class and to him and stum and jump and stim. And other kids got used to it. It's a metronome. It's like a sound in the background. And kids learn to adapt. He also had sensory areas and places to go to take breaks, but he came right back. And I just think disability is part of the human condition. He lives in our world. He is in our classrooms. He is in our schools. He is in our workplaces. And we're going to try to make it work so that he can be part of that. But everybody has to sort of understand there's sort of a level of tolerance that happens that doesn't look like the way we taught teachers to teach in the 1950s. There should, why isn't there a wiggle chair in every room? Why isn't there a beanbag chair in every room? Like, we make our spaces more available. Kids where are we working from today? I'm assuming, well, at least Grace, Cindy and I are working from home. I'm sitting on a comfy couch with all the pillows I ever wanted. I'm learning and I'm sending information. And I think we need to be more accommodating generally in the space of the classroom, right? And so that goes to the UDL thing, but it also goes sort of to the whole community of how we treat people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a great transition. Going back to what Cindy had said, that parents call when things aren't going well, which leads to, we know that we need to look at what else we can do for them within the classroom. But how do you recommend addressing potential resistance or reluctance when they are sitting at that table and they're advocating accommodations or modifications, but the team may be resistant to implement those? How do you support the parents in addressing that?
And that's essentially what our whole job is. And, first, to understand and realize that they are equal partners. And that's not just me saying that, that's what the law says. So that then goes to knowing what their rights are. And it is a very complex law. There's areas of law that specialize just in special education. And not that, Mary and I have that background. We have, some additional training as parents who've gone through the system in understanding what those laws are, and not only understanding what the laws are, but how to use those to get what we feel our children need in the classroom. So, not like Mary said, this is a full-time job. And, we knew early on with our kids being in special education early on that this was going to be our career. And so I think that, families calling us, being aware of what their rights are and how to use them. And, we usually say too that the first rule in advocacy is documentation. So, writing to the school and putting it in writing. I feel that my child would benefit from this. I feel that this is an accommodation they need based on their disability. And, then down to the specifics of, what's prior written notice. When a school rejects a proposal made by a family, how can they respond? We have a close relationship with the Office of Dispute Resolution and work hard on early dispute resolution. We don't want anyone to have to go to due process. So we're going to work early on, things like IEP facilitation and, mediation, things that aren't going to cost folks money, aren't going to be a huge emotional burden, but resolve things within the team, because it's, Peter Wright, if you've ever seen the Peter Wright website, wrightslaw.com, says that special education is a marriage with no divorce. It's, the team is marriage, and you have to have this working relationship. And no matter what, this is how your child's going to receive education. So we have to work through that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just continuing to let parents know, like, they are the equal part. And I think sometimes it can be intimidating for them to come to that table and know that. But the work that you do is great in supporting them and giving them that confidence, because as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the educators around the table have that degree, but they're not the parent, which is a whole different degree in itself. A doctorate.
Yeah, postdoc even, right? You're
Right.
never done learning.
You can't, yeah, there's no end to that.
Sure, 1000%. So maybe one of the last things that we'd like you to kind of touch on and help to kind of synthesize some of this information is, can you give us a little information on local task forces and maybe how those might start building relationships before we get to these maybe contentious or some of these maybe unsettling experiences, or what are they, and do they allow for that to happen?
Sure, I'll start and Cindy can pick up. We're both avid members and have been for a very long time of our local task forces, even after our children left school. Just because it's such an important part of the work of advocacy. It's real grassroots stuff. It's learning. It's learning where to go and get the resources in your school district, in your IU, for not only educating yourself, but educating others. And I think for me personally, it was, the first time I went, my voice not only shook, I started crying and said what I needed to say and was terrified that I really messed up. Like I was going to ruin my son's experience. And it turned out to be the best thing in the world, because the administrators there came right over and they were like, we can work on this. This is not, we can move through this. And in doing that work, learn to advocate with others, for others, to support others, but also to work on systems change within our district. And so, things like communications, like check out your school's website, not your district necessarily, but other districts, some of them maybe doesn't even point to where the special education page is, or who to talk to if you have an issue, or, so we can resolve a lot of things in advance of making any real change. From an outside pressure, we don't want to do that. I mean, really, we want to teach people to talk with each other and work and resolve issues. But typically, these systems things only come about because there's more than one person who's experiencing it. Generally, quite a few people would experience the same thing over and over again. And that's where change comes in. And we can all work together as stakeholders, educators with parents, to resolve some of those issues. So I think it's important just to keep the dialogue open And your local task force on the right to education comes out of the Park Consent Decree. It's really important that parents are the majority stakeholders and lead these efforts. Sometimes we see that that's not happening. And so we work to educate them. Cindy's been doing some specific work around that. So I'll let her talk about LTFs or local task force, maybe the state task force, and sort of what we're doing to support them.
Again, Mary and I are both very passionate about local task force. I'm on the local task force in Allegheny County and have been for 20 years. And, you know, from other families, got that information to attend my local task force, which is supported by the intermediate unit. But as Mary said, per the Park Consent Decree, supported by the IU and bringing in folks from the IU. On the AIU in Allegheny County, we have a superintendent of record, so that the families that are there and that we allow them to bring their concerns to try and resolve concerns. If we can't resolve them at the meetings, then the other folks who are coming, a lot of agency people, will help out, offer their business card. But from having that huge network of people that are there, we get the perspective of the school district side, why the school district might be saying something, why they might be responding to the parent in a certain way. And it leads to a lot more understanding, discussion, and just that overall, again, support. You know, we usually say that schools, they have a lot of support. They have their IUs, they have the patent system. But families, we're out here just treading water. So with entities like the local task force, which is kind of led by the state task force, so that's, you know, PDE, Department of Ed representation, ARC representation from the governor's office. We can find that support from others who might be experiencing the same thing or have gone through the same thing, but also the networking at local task force is amazing. You know, I got my job through the PEAL Center 17 years ago, and that was because I was involved in my local task force. And truthfully, to the friendships that you make, you know, with other families is just invaluable. So, you know, my second job would be to, you know, be a salesperson for the local task force. But what we're doing, what PEAL is doing to support the local task force is state task force meets about 5 times a year. So the family members of that, I mean, it's 51% parent membership. So we're looking for leaders on the LTFs to be family members. And sometimes they need a little more information, a deeper dive, we say, into certain things that as a parent training and information center, we hear from the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level, and information that's come down from our regional PTI, and want to share that information with those families so they can then take it to their families that are part of the local task force. So we're hosting 3, we're calling them deep dives, for family leaders of local task force to kind of get together and talk about more than just foundational or basic level special education issues. We're going to be focusing this first one on October 18th around the general supervision. So that's monitoring of school districts, monitoring of the state. That's changes and guidance that have come down from the Office of Special Education Programs, and let LTFs know how they can be important in the monitoring of school districts and how the work that they do is actually vital to that monitoring process.
Yeah, that's great information. And we'll make sure that we get all of these links and resources in there. But I think you ladies have provided so much great information. This has been a great conversation. We really appreciate your time, and we appreciate the work in advocacy that you're doing. So one thing to kind of wrap things up, how could folks reach out to you or access any of these resources or any of these initiatives that we've talked about today?
The best way to find us is through our website you can literally put in PEAL Center, probably PEAL Center, or pealcenter.org, and it should pop up, and you'll get all the different ways to contact us. I did want to put in a plug not only for individual assistance, but also training. And under the training tab, it's like events and training. There's actually a training calendar, and they can also join our Facebook page, go to Instagram. I would reliably go to the Facebook page. They can sign up for our newsletter on our website, and they'll get most of the trainings that we're doing. I think those trainings are kind of critical, and we do very basic, understanding the IEP and reevaluation process, whatever evaluation, reevaluation. So there are a lot of different opportunities for people to get that experience. And you can also, as a school district, as a parent group, anyone can request trainings. We'd like to have a minimum of people, but we're happy to accommodate that both virtually and in person when we can. Okay.
Awesome.
So you can, we also answer some family questions or get information through our info at pealcenter.org. And our phone number, I'll provide the toll-free number, 866-950-1040.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, ladies. We absolutely appreciate all of that information. There will be a lot of resources to click on in the show notes. So please feel free to check that out and reach out with your questions because, we're all in this together, and this community building is super important as we work to empower variability.